Hello everybody, welcome back to the shop. Something different today, another slice out of my life. I thought I'd just talk about this. I bought this air compressor, no kidding, must have been 30 years ago, and it has worked really well. I can't tell you the countless times I've used this to inflate a tire or top off a tire for an automobile. It's a 12 volt compressor. And the cord is here to plug into a cigarette lighter, and this cord wraps around there and is self-contained in the unit, and there's a switch right there. And in my experience, when I was a young man, a lot of the cars we had, the tires didn't hold air very well. So I went out and purchased these little 12 volt compressors, and I went through a couple of them, and they just didn't last. And I learned my lesson the hard way. You really have to go out and get a good one, because for a compressor this size to top off an automobile tire, it's got to be able to run a good 5 minutes or so. And if it's not built for it, it'll just overheat and self-destruct. And I don't remember what I paid for this, but I remember it was, it was a pretty expensive version of these 12 volt air compressors. Lately we've been using it and it's been blowing the fuse. And before I just throw this away and try to get another one, I thought I would open it up and see if I happen to get lucky. It does run, so it's not like anything is seized. And I'm not quite sure why it's drawing more current, other than maybe I'm thinking the motor itself is worn. And as a result, to produce the power it needs, it's just drawing more current than it used to. I personally believe these days things are engineered, designed to last a fixed number of years. So this is the tool, and I don't see any bearings in there. Basically motor, fan for circulating some air, a little tiny gear, spins a bigger gear. This gear, this is the housing obviously with the piston in it. And here's the cooling fins up here for the piston. The piston's riding up and down in here. This is probably a little crankshaft in here, turned by this gear here. And if you look on that end, you can see the crankshaft with the counterweight. And that's the bottom of the piston rod. Kind of cool, huh? Yeah, you can see this thing was designed to last. Yeah, so again, that is a pretty good size electric motor for automobile use. Not sure how much bigger motors in general will get. And that's a pretty good size piston. And look at this casting, right? There's screws that go through here and hold the motor to this housing. And that's attached to the shaft. If there's any bearings, I guess they would just be in this motor. Maybe there's a bearing in here, or maybe it's just the bushing. Kind of hard to tell. And again, they got cooling fins up here. This is the top of the piston where the real heat is going to be generated, and there's a very simple reed valve up here, so the air can go into the piston, but it can't come out. When the piston comes up, it closes that valve. It's a little flap probably that it pushes up to the top of the piston chamber, and then the air is forced out the hose. And there's probably a similar valve over here for that, so the air can only go one way. I can't recall any time I ever had a dead flat tire, and I resorted to this guy to blow it up to full pressure. It's more typically been, a couple times a year, you'd go out with this and you'd top off all your tires, because your tires tend to lose a pound per square inch of inflation pressure per month or so. So I tried to disassemble this just for giggles, and I ended up breaking the hose here. So I think this is toast. As a result, I ended up going out to purchase this. I didn't really want to buy it, but it was the only one I could find that I could get my hands on quickly. I kind of just wanted to get this behind me. This thing comes in a nifty little pouch. You can see on the surface it's a lot smaller than what it's replacing. And this is kind of an interesting type fit. And what I'm curious to do is compare this to what it's replacing, because I was very happy with this. And it appears as though the motor in the new compressor looks a little smaller in diameter than the one it's replacing. Clearly we don't have the gear reduction. It looks as though this motor might be driving the crankshaft of this compressor directly. So this actually did get reasonable reviews. So this is a heavy unit for its size. In fact, it feels similar in weight to the business end of this compressor. And I like the fact it just has an old-fashioned mechanical pressure gauge on it. I don't really want to get a compressor that has some sort of LED or electronic display. I just think that's way too much complication for something that can easily get away with being very simple. And the way this is sold, it comes with a short length of line. This end would screw onto the Schrader valve, and this is a quick disconnect that goes on here. And that works fine. I guess this is about a few feet long from what I recall. And this is 15 or so, which should be fine for any given vehicle. And I also wanted to get a compressor that simply plugs into the cigarette lighter, just to save the hassle of popping the hood and getting at the battery terminals. And being such a small compressor, either of these, it has to be able to run for a pretty long duty cycle, at least a good 10 minutes or so before it overheats. And apparently this little guy can do that. It says in the instructions you have to turn this thing on before you connect the hose to the tire, or you're going to blow the fuse. And there is a fuse in here, and it's one of these old-fashioned tubular glass ones. This is apparently 15 amps, and they don't seem to give you any extras, so I'm gonna have to go out and see if I can get some of those. And I'm not so sure I like that idea that you have to turn it on before you attach it to the tire, because to be honest, that just seems a little counterintuitive, and I'd hate to keep popping these fuses, so I have to give that some thought. For my whole life with this compressor, I've always attached it to the tire, checked the tire pressure for reference, and then turned it on and watched as it inflated to whatever degree I needed. So, like I say, that Harbor Freight requirement might just be a deal killer. And it's not so much for me, but I might not be the only one using this compressor. And if everybody who uses it gets in the habit of popping fuses, and where there's so many little parts and pieces that just might be lost when you're in the field, that's not what I consider a good thing. It's too bad they didn't somehow incorporate a more traditional automotive fuse that wouldn't have this multi-piece, multi-assembly characteristic. I like the size, of course. It's small. I kind of wish it was maybe 20% bigger, closer to the size of this compressor it's replacing. I would have been more than happy to pay 20% more. Well, for another update, I was in the Blue store, and for about the price I paid for this guy, I was able to purchase this one. And this one seems a lot more interesting to me, and I'm hopeful I'm going to be happy with it, at least on the surface. I like the fact that it has a quick release for the valve stem. I think screwing something on is laborious and difficult. I used to do that when I was a little boy, and I always found it tough. And I like the fact, of course, it has to plug into a cigarette lighter. So, and my gold standard, of course, is the remnants of this compressor, which served me well for a good 30 years. So if this guy is giving me the impression it's closer to this guy, then I will stick with him. Okay, here it is out of the box. It comes with a carrying case, which seems a little lightweight, certainly compared to the Pittsburgh. The storage for the inflator hose is this wraparound mechanism, which I suppose isn't so bad. The cord, however, wraps around the base, and the plug stows in the bottom, so that's nice. And also the accessories for inflating stow in the bottom, which is nice. Nice touch. They also give you 4 places to hold the cap to a tire valve stem, and they give you 4 caps, 2 here and 2 here, which, yeah, that might come in handy, I guess. And I like the fact it's an old-fashioned mechanical pressure gauge. There's a power switch up here, and in the 1 position it turns this little LED light on, which I suppose could be useful, and in the 2 position it turns the inflator on. And again, the acid test is compared to my gold standard. Here you can see the 2, one in front of the other. They seem to be similar in dimensions. So I'm hopeful this guy's going to give me everything I need. The instruction manual, it's 5 pages that are this big. One disappointment to me is it does have a fuse in it, but it's an inline, old-style automotive glass tube fuse, and there doesn't seem to be a way to carry an extra one conveniently in this package. And it's a 15 amp fuse. I'm going to have to get a couple of those fuses for good measure. This would have been a better package if it took a normal automotive fuse, maybe somewhere here in the body, and then have a spare handy. That would have been a sweet deal. And there appears to be no such restriction on turning this on or off. And again, it comes with this bag. I'm not really so sure you need it. However, there is a warning here that says this product can expose you to lead. Sounds good. I don't understand how it can expose you to lead. I don't know if they're talking about the bag or they're talking about the inflator. It doesn't appear to be any additional information. So there it is inside. It fits well. I don't really know what you're supposed to do to cinch this shut. It's got a drawstring on it. Well, that's a bit of a mystery. Maybe you're just supposed to tie this? Yeah, I'm not so sure this bag was even worth throwing in the package. And this product is made in China, as you might have expected. Okay, and here it is, hooked up, plugged into my truck. It's not easy to read. It's somewhere around 30 psi, and I'm just going to see how long it's going to take to get it up to 35 or so. So it took about 60 seconds, or a little less, to bring my tire from 30 up to about 35 psi. which I think is really good. And when I was checking the fuse in this thing, I couldn't get it back together. So I'm gonna have to disassemble this because this fuse doesn't fit. There's a couple little jaws in there and I can't get the fuse in there, so I don't know what's up with that. Seems to be just one screw holding the whole thing together. Hoping I'm going to be able to get it back together. And there's the mechanism. So the trouble I was having was the fuse doesn't seem to compress the spring at all. It's hanging up here. I think that's supposed to slide in. Okay, I have this back together. The spring in there is pretty stiff. So it seems to be working well now. I'm generally happy with it. I personally think this would be a home run if they had a better way to stow the hose. It almost latches like that, but not quite. So this is kind of dangling around. And then when you wind the cord on the bottom, you kind of need a little twist tie here to hold these together, because obviously depending on how tightly you wind it depends on where this ends up, and apparently I wound this a little tighter than it was originally, so that's something to keep in mind. And finally, it takes a little dexterity and know-how to reassemble this should the fuse ever go bad, and I think doing that at night, if you're stuck on the side of the road, would be particularly inconvenient. I think it would be a much better product if it had a regular automotive type of fuse on it and a place to hold one or two extra fuses. That would really be sweet. So after giving this some thought, there's a place back here that holds these inflation pieces. What I've done is I've taken two of the fuses, put them in a little plastic bag, and these fit in here, and then this piece can go back in like so, and that seems pretty stable. And of course the remaining three fuses keep in the bag, and this bag cinches, pulling it like so. Well, that's all I got for this one. I'm pretty pleased with this little compressor. As always, appreciate you making it to the end of the video, and like I always say, take care, stay safe, and keep your eyes out for the next one.